And now I'm super excited to introduce our speaker of the night. And this is Dr. Kenny Gibbs, right? So Dr. Gibbs is chief of the undergraduate and predoctoral cross-disciplinary training branch within the Division of Training, Workforce Development, and Diversity at the NIGMS, so the National Institute of General Medical Sciences. So in the NIGMS, he's also a program director in the Division of Genetics, Molecular, Cellular, and Developmental Biology, where he leads and manages a number of grants to promote basic research in the areas of stem cell biology. Prior to joining NIGMS, Dr. Gibbs was a career prevention fellow at the National Cancer Institute and also AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Science Foundation, the NSF, in the Director of Education and Human Resources. So Dr. Gibbs completed his PhD in the immunology program at Stanford University and received his BS in biochemistry and molecular biology from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where he was a Meyerhoff, a Mark, and an HHMI scholar, a trifecta. So Dr. Gibbs has previously served on the committee for the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine consensus report entitled Graduate STEM Education for the 21st Century that informed a lot of the policies that should be implemented to really bridge and inform how graduate STEM education should be developed for the future. Also on the board of directors for the National Postdoctoral Association, and he has written about scientific training and diversity issues for science career and Scientific American. So Dr. Gibbs is a huge champion for diversity and inclusion, leading and developing many efforts within the NIH, including the K99R00 Mosaic program that we just heard from. And he's relentless in bringing about the changes that we want to see, right? So if we want science to work for all of us, this is what we have to do, to keep changing the system and keep making new initiatives that are going to break and make that system works for all of us. All right. So as before, I want to remind you all that you can type your questions while Dr. Gibbs is giving his talk in the Q&A box, and he'll be glad to answer them, and we can call you out soon. But with all of that being said, it's my greatest pleasure to bring Dr. Kenny Gibbs here to give our talk of the night. Kenny, take it from here.
Gustavo, I gotta have you introduce me more often, man. It makes me feel good. Really quick, I just want to confirm you're saying the slides, correct, and not the presenter view? Is that correct? You see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Beautiful.
See it.
All right, so thank y'all so much for having me. And I just want to reaffirm what Dr. Silva said. It was phenomenal to hear all those talks, and particularly to the Mosaic scholars. And we'll talk more about the program, but it's just wonderful to see y'all. I've corresponded with many of y'all via email, but to see you and to see your work and to see your passion, it's just wonderful. I'll riff for a second, but you know, when we were conceiving of the program and the need for it, which I'll talk more about in a moment, some people said, well, can you actually find enough people from underrepresented groups, from these diverse backgrounds to actually constitute a program? And I said, yes, of course we can. And to see you all is the fruit of that. And what we can do is really facilitate the great scientists you are and the professional growth you're going to have. So I'm just so excited to hear y'all, as well as the graduate students, amazing honeybees and everything else. Okay, so I'm Kenny. I'm at the NIH, and I'm going to speak a little bit about what NIH is doing to cultivate and support a diverse research workforce. A little outline before we get going, do a little definitions because people use terminology in various ways. So I want to be clear about what I'm talking about, as well as data to support. You know, sometimes you're asked, why do we need these sorts of things? And so I can show you why. NIGMS programmatic approaches across the training pathway, as well as some trans-NIH initiatives, and then some closing thoughts on advancing racial equity, which include listening, acknowledging, and importantly, acting. I'll take a brief note. You may hear children screaming during the part of this talk because we're at home during COVID, but they are well cared for. Okay, so first, definitions and data. So what do we mean when we're talking about diversity, right? And so importantly, diversity really is, we're looking at the numbers. And in our context, it's numerical representation of different groups in the biomedical sciences. As I like to say frequently, diversity is a property of groups and not individuals. And so I say I'm a Black man, not a diverse person. Individuals are not diverse. I might have diverse interests, but I'm not diverse by virtue of being Black. And it's not the same as underrepresentation, although the diversity lens helps us to understand issues of underrepresentation and why we need to really begin to tackle those issues at both individual, institutional, and structural levels. Inclusion then focuses on, the felt experience within the biomedical research enterprise. And so we're really trying to foster environments where individuals from all backgrounds are welcomed and feel integrated into and supported by the biomedical community. I did my PhD in immunology at Stanford, and after that, as Gustavo mentioned, I was a AAAS fellow, and I really started to transition into researching, using my research skills to tackle the workforce, because I saw lots of my friends, as I say frequently, I had 3 of my friends who were Black women at elite East Coast institutions who had first author papers in single word journals and who had such terrible experiences they left science altogether. And I said, this is a shame for science because we're losing what they can contribute, but it's a shame for them, right? As people, everybody should have the opportunity to explore their scientific interests and develop their careers. I loved seeing the joy on your faces as you talked about the things that are interesting to you. And it's unjust that that gets robbed from people. And so really thinking about inclusion is important. And that gets to ideas of equity and justice. So what about how are you treated? What access to opportunities do you have and resources? And then really start looking at the outcomes, because ultimately, if the system's unjust, you get these unjust outcomes, and we got to begin to tackle some of those issues. When we think about representation across the biomedical academic pathway, you see here, so from top to bottom, we have level of training from associate's degrees up through full professor. In orange, we have women. The dark orange are women from well-represented backgrounds. Those would be white or Asian. And then the light orange would be women from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds, Hispanic or Latino, Latinx, African-American or Black, Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander. And then in the green bars, we have those that we have men. Again, the light green are men from underrepresented backgrounds, and the dark green are men from well-represented backgrounds, white or Asian. And what you can see very clearly is that as we go through the training pathway, the thick green bar gets a lot bigger, and all the other bars get a lot smaller, right? And so this is where we talk about the talent pool that exists. At the PhD level, close to 60% of folks are women from all racial ethnic backgrounds and underrepresented men. But by the time you get to the assistant professor, you're down to about 40%. So even from the PhD to postdoc, we're seeing losses, and that gets compounded as you go through the professoriate. So these are some of the issues that animate the work that I and my colleagues do at NIH. And right now I'm going to talk about some of the approaches that we take at NIGMS. So NIGMS is one of 27 different institutes and centers at NIH. We are the basic science institute, and so we're not really focused on disease, life stages, or body parts. We're really understanding fundamental processes that underlie biology and that can set the table for understanding diseases, prevention, and treatments. We also take a leadership role in both building research capacity through the nation and enhancing research training and promoting workforce diversity. What that looks like is that NIGMS administers about 1,000 research training and diversity enhancing awards at about 300 institutions, and that's at about a clip of about $340 million each year, right? And so each dot represents a different award, and we have awards in across the nation, both through our training division and our capacity building division. So that gets made that $340 million is spent in the context of a number of different programs that you see here. And I don't expect you all to absorb all of this. You can go to NIGMS TWD, put that in your favorite search engine and it should come up. But we can see that we have programs that span from the community college through the faculty level. And some programs are cross-cutting. And so if you are an investigator that is interested in supporting a student from, for example, an underrepresented background, I encourage you to look into the diversity supplement program. If you are a graduate student, you would look at a fellowship. Graduate student or postdoc, you would look at a fellowship. F30, F31, or F32. And as you progress in your career, you look at K awards and then move on to other awards. But right now, I'll focus a little bit on what we've been doing with our award programs, because many of our institutional programs, URISE, MARC, IMSD, and particularly our institutional training programs called T32s, we really restructured in the last few years and said, we're not going to focus solely on how many, or even primarily on how many well-funded investigators you have. We're going to focus on what you're doing for trainees, right? We don't assume that because a person publishes a lot of papers, even in single award journals. They're a great mentor. And our focus is on making sure trainees have great experiences in their environments, both in their laboratory and institutions. And so what we do, we have all of our programs thinking about how they can work toward enhancing diversity. And we have them all focused on what we call skills development. So we have the technical skills, methods, and technology, the operational skills that all scientists need, right? Acquiring information, experimental design, data interpretation, and then professional skills, management, leadership, communication, and teamwork. And we say all programs are expected to focus on technical, operational, and professional skills development. Now, there's a whole lot of things that we put up here. I'm not expecting you to read it all, but I would say I've highlighted a few things in blue that might be especially relevant to this crowd. So in addition to skills development, rigor, and responsible and safe cognitive research, all programs are expected to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the research training environment. Historically, sometimes we've thought about having, diversity enhancing programs and then just general training programs. But again, we want all of our programs, no matter the focus, to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the research training environment, to have inclusive, safe, and supportive research environments, and to focus on building supportive cohorts that can help students and trainees throughout their career as they develop science identity and have self-efficacy. Importantly, all of our applications include what we call a recruitment plan to enhance diversity, saying that if you have this money, you need to make sure you have a robust plan that you follow up on to make sure scientists, students, and trainees from a wide variety of backgrounds, especially those that are underrepresented, are recruited to the program. And that you have robust activities at an institutional and programmatic level to retain trainees, so to sustain their interests throughout the program. And importantly, we have mentor training, assessment, and accountability procedures. As I've said, sometimes we have people who aren't mentors, but are tour mentors. And so we know that exists. And so we say, how are you as an institution going to make sure you only have supportive people as part of the program? And if you recognize that there's a misalignment, that you have mechanisms in place to remove them from the program. And so I'll focus on a couple of the programs that maybe some of you have participated in. And so this is just an example of a couple of our programs with a focus on enhancing diversity. So at the undergraduate level, we have two programs called URISE, the Undergraduate Research Training Initiative for Student Enhancement, and the MARC program, Maximizing Access to Research Careers. At the graduate level, we have what are called the GRISE, so the Graduate Research Training Initiative for Science Student Enhancement, and the Initiative for Maximizing Student Development. And so these programs have the same goals, they just had different institution types, because we know that all institution types can promote and support students from a wide variety of backgrounds. And what they do, and maybe you were a part of these programs, I was a MARC scholar in my undergraduate, as Dr. Silva mentioned. But we provide things that are important, like tuition remission and stipend, because we know that the ability to focus on science often comes down to things like money and being able to have the time to focus. And so we provide tuition remission and stipend. We provide research experiences through the institutions, as well as seminars, networking, and career development activities. Again, cohort building activities, and then individualized mentoring and oversight throughout your training pathway. So whether that's throughout your PhD, throughout your undergrad career. I also want to make sure you're aware of a program that we have called PrEP, which is the Post-Baccalaureate Research Education Program. So this is a one-year post-baccalaureate research apprenticeship and skills development program. So this means you finished your undergrad degree, you're ready to go to grad school, but you want some additional training to help you before you prepare, as you prepare for your applications. So PrEP is a great option. You take 1 year, you're in the lab most of the time, 75% of the time. The other 25% of the time, you're doing courses for skills development and other professional development activities. And importantly, 75% of participants in this program progress to PhD programs in the biomedical research sciences. So these are just some of the examples of the programs that we have. Again, I encourage you, we have many, many more bridging programs, from community college to 4-year, from master's to PhD, and many, many more. And so I encourage you to check out our programs at the NIGMS Training, Workforce Development, and Diversity website. So these focused earlier, I'm going to talk a little bit about our work on enhancing faculty diversity. You've heard about Mosaic, but I'm going to talk about a little bit of the work that underlies that, because we show that as you go through the training pathway, you get the number of students from underrepresented groups, scientists becomes less and less. So this is a paper I published in eLife, an update on some data that I published in eLife back in 2016. So what you see is the temporal trends in representation among scientists from historically underrepresented racial and ethnic groups from 1980 to 2019. As I say, this is from longer than I've been alive, right? But you can see that in 1980, there were 104 in gray PhD graduates from the biomedical sciences. And through time, that's grown to over 1,200 per year, right? Which is why when folks say, oh, there aren't any scientists from underrepresented groups, I say that's not true. Look at the data. We then compare that to the number of assistant professors in basic science departments at medical colleges. I focus on that population because we have great data there, and medical colleges get 2/3 of NIH's extramural money, and so money that we send to institutions. So that's a great way to focus about what the future research workforce is. And we see that that's gone from about 130 in 1980 to 556 in 2019. Right, and so you see these lines begin to diverge particularly sharply after the year 2000. If you look at that just relativized to population growth, you know, we've seen a 12-fold increase in PhDs, but just a 4.3-fold increase in the number of assistant professors. And so that motivated us to say we really need to do work to support dynamic scholars who are interested and passionate about pursuing their research careers in academia independently. And that's where we came up with the Mosaic program. So again, Mosaic stands for Maximizing Opportunities for Scientific and Academic Independent Careers. And it's designed to facilitate the transition of promising postdoctoral researchers from diverse backgrounds, for example, those from underrepresented groups in the biomedical research workforce, into independent faculty careers with a focus on NIH-funded research. And the overarching goal of the program is to enhance diversity of independent investigators that are conducting research within the NIH mission, with a priority on addressing documented underrepresentation at the faculty level. And so what does that look like? Again, you've heard a little bit about it, but we have Mosaic KIA-9 applicants. They compete like everybody else. They have the same level of rigorous peer review with some additional focus on candidates that have commitments and, you know, demonstrable commitments, compelling commitments and contributions to enhancing diversity. They then are reviewed, and then they're assigned to one of 3 scientific society partners we have, including the ASBMB, as well as the American Society for Cell Biology and the Association for American Medical Colleges. We do that every year, and we expect the program to grow to at least 75 scholars by year 5. And I just want to put a plug here, right? So Mosaic applications are due 3 times a year. The next due date is June 12th. If you have a postdoc who you think is a good fit, please reach out to me or the other colleagues listed on the Mosaic webpage to talk about your application. You don't have to wait too late. You don't necessarily have to have a paper in a single word journal to apply. Please reach out and apply. Don't self-eliminate. And what's really been gratifying is that we started the program at NIGMS, but it's now nearly a trans-NIH initiative. So almost every IC that gives out a parent KIA-9 is participating in the Mosaic program. And if you're from one of the 2 that's not, just email me. We can discuss potential options. And what we've seen here, this is the first 2 rounds of Mosaic scholars. So you've seen the scholars at ASBMB, but we also have scholars at ASCB and AAMC. And what we can see here is that the future of science is great, that we have a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds with passions for science and for promoting equity in science. And so that's what we're doing through this program. And so it's exciting to see it come to fruition. I'm just heartened to see y'all, and we look forward to continuing the program growing. Beyond Mosaic, I want to talk about a few other trans-NIH initiatives. So one, which you should keep your eye out, is called FIRST. And so this is from the Common Fund, which supports high impact projects that transcend any single institute's mission. And so FIRST stands for Faculty Institutional Recruitment for Sustainable Transformation. It's a program that aims to enhance and maintain cultures of inclusive excellence, of inclusion in the biomedical research community. And so what this is going to do is that they're going to provide funds to a number of institutions over the next 3 fiscal years to promote and develop models of inclusion that can then be utilized throughout the nation. And so the first cohort the first group of the first cohort scholar programs are expected to be announced later this year. And so keep your eyes out. And what I say, if you're a postdoc or plan to be a postdoc, stay tuned and be aware of these future awardee institutions. The programs are going to be required to provide environments for inclusive excellence, inclusive being the key word there, and faculty development corps where you have additional mentorship, retention plans, protected time for research, etc. And so keep an eye out for that if you're a grad student or postdoc, because this is a model that NIH is developing. These are peer-reviewed environments. They should be environments that are suitable for your career development. And if you're a faculty member, keep an eye out, because I believe there will be additional calls for applications in future years. I also want to point everybody to our new initiative called Unite. And so Unite is a trans NIH initiative meant to tackle structural racism. Our director, Dr. Collins, has mentioned that structural racism has plagued the biomedical research enterprise because it's part of America. And if there's structural racism in America, there's structural racism in things like the biomedical research enterprise. And so what this is a group of 5 committees with NIH staff on them, really seeking to address a number of different issues and tackle some of these structures. And so the acronyms are there. You may have seen a request for information that just closed recently. And so that's part of understanding stakeholder experiences through listening and learning. I've seen, having worked there the last 5 years, a new level of humility and openness to listening and understanding that hasn't been there, previously, especially before the murder of George Floyd. There's a focus on new research on health disparities, minority health, and health equity. COVID-19 has laid bare the inequities in our society and how the disparities that they bring forth. And as a health agency, we really want to stimulate research that can be impactful in this space. We want to also improve the NIH culture and structure for equity, inclusion, and equity. And that really is looking internally, looking at who works at NIH, our processes, and how we can do better as an organization, both in the intramural program, which is the research that's on campus, as well as the extramural program. How do we enhance transparency, communication, and accountability for all of our stakeholders, internal and external? And then finally, the extramural research ecosystem, where we're thinking about changing policy, culture, and structure to promote workforce diversity. So really, you can Google or use your favorite search engine for the NIH Unite initiative. And I'd say keep your eyes on the upcoming advisory committee to the director meetings, where Dr. Collins and Tabak will continue to provide updates for the community about what NIH is doing to move forward these important issues. I want to point to 2 things quickly, might be of relevance to this audience, which are funding opportunities to address structural racism and discrimination. So one is from NIGMS. And so really, again, thinking about how do we understand and address the impact of structural racism and discrimination on biomedical research career progression and the biomedical research enterprise. So we have a notice of special interest. We have particular interest for our programs that include the research on interventions, as well as the science of science policy, which we partner with NSF on. And so I won't take more time on that, but I will say plug into the notice and look that up, particularly if you're more education minded in your research or policy minded in your research. But we also have participated in this request for application that is led by the National Institute for Minority Health and Health Disparities on understanding and addressing the impact of structural racism and discrimination on minority health and health disparities. And so within our mission, we're thinking about, again, examples being the impact of structural racism and discrimination on our clinical areas like sepsis, innate immunity, wound healing, inflammation, sources of bias in computational research like electronic health records, computational modeling for structural racism and discrimination on health disparities and infectious disease, and effective strategies to reduce those disparities, and even things like mechanistic studies of the effects of discrimination-based social trauma on epigenetic or other molecular or cellular processes. And so again, if you're a faculty member and you believe even as a basic scientist, your research could be illustrative for this, I encourage you to apply for this funding announcement. There's going to be a webinar, I believe, later in May. And so keep an eye out there. In the last 4 minutes, I'm going to do a couple of parting thoughts. And these are some thoughts I shared in the American Society for Cell Biology newsletter last fall. It's publicly available on promoting diversity and enhancing racial equity in the biomedical sciences. And so when I think about advancing racial equity, I think it's important to remember, like, why do we do this, right? And the point of diversity isn't simply about having differently colored bodies coexisting in the lab, but ensure everybody can contribute and show up as their full selves, right? As I say, I'm descended from enslaved Africans here on the American shores. I'm a Christian, like all sorts of things. I'm a husband, a father, many things. If I can't bring the fullness of who I am, then really what's the point, right? And without a culture of inclusion and equity, diversity can sometimes represent another form of oppression and exclusion. We'll have you here, but just this much. We won't really let you experience your full selves here. Again, I think in the last year and the broader attention that's been brought to bear since George Floyd's murder, I've seen better inclusion and equity even in my own space, but I think it's important that throughout the enterprise, we cultivate this, right? And promoting diversity without committing to racial justice really just reinforces the social hierarchies that have marred our society. They've marred science for centuries, and it directly harms the research enterprise, but more importantly, the people, the individuals. Like, I think about my friends and just the trauma that they went through, and I don't want to see that happen. So then, how do we move forward, right? I try to simplify it and say we move forward as a community by listening, acknowledging, and acting, right? And so listening means taking the time to understand what's happening, providing space for your colleagues and trainees to share if they choose to. And I think it's particularly important for those of you who are in the majority group or in positions of power. And I think it's important to really listen to our social and behavioral science colleagues. They have deep expertise here that can be very helpful in moving us forward if we listen. And importantly, when we listen, we do this not to defend ourselves or to defend the perceived meritocracy of our institutions, but really for idea of understanding what's happened. I think about it kind of like a literature search. You got to really understand fully what's out there before you start diving in and moving forward. And that means also we acknowledge the truth. We acknowledge about like what's happening in our environments and the roles that we have played in that, right? Nobody's perfect. I have a job where I promote diversity for a living. I'm not perfect, but if we say, hey, I hear you, and here's how I'm contributing, and here's how I can make it better, that's a step to moving forward, right? And so tell the truth about where you are as an organization and what that says about your organization. I say, which is true, when I was at Stanford, and I'm not picking on Stanford because I had a great experience there, and every other place I interviewed with had the same kind of phenomenon, but there were more Black presidents of the United States than there were Black tenured basic science faculty. Because I was there 2005 to 2008. I'm sorry, 2005 to 2010 as a PhD student. So during that time, former President Barack Obama was elected, and there were still 0 tenured basic science faculty there. And I said, come on, like, why is it easier to get to the White House than to get your tenure track here, right? And I'm not just picking on Stanford, because this is the same at many NIH institutes and centers in their intramural programs, as well as extramural leadership in many institutions. But we're scientists, we're committed to truth. And so if we acknowledge it, the truth can set us free if we let it, right? Don't be captive to guilt. Be captive to the idea of what we could be if we actually move forward together as an enterprise. And finally, acting is important. And so talk and internal feelings alone do not bring change. Resource allocation and policy do. So Mosaic is an example of action, where we said, here is a problem, and our leader and other leaders have brought resources to bear to say, okay, we can actually do something here. Does it fix everything? No. Are we making a structural change that can hopefully lead to more change in the future? Yes. But that can be holistic review for admissions or for grant funding or promotion and tenure review. And when you act, I think it's important to act locally and specifically, right? And so sometimes we have this diversity umbrella, which is everybody who's not a white, heterosexual, able-bodied, middle-class man is thrown into the bucket of diversity. But, understand what's happening with specific populations and specific groups at your institution, right? And then use that to move forward. And so finally, what do we need? As I say, Black, Latin, Indigenous scientists need what all other scientists need: opportunity, resources, and respect. As we recreate our spaces to be more just, more equitable, and more inclusive, the result will be enhanced diversity. better science, and ultimately a better society. You know, the last thing I'll close with, people always say, well, this is hard. And I say, we're scientists. We do hard things. We put people on the moon. We made advances in regenerative medicine, CRISPR. We even have a COVID vaccine, multiple COVID vaccines in under a year. This is all very difficult, but we do hard things. And so we are up to this task, and we can do the hard work of purposefully undoing the structures that hinder opportunity for so many and making a better opportunity for ourselves and for everybody else. So thank you all so much. It's been great to be with y'all digitally. Happy to take any questions. Feel free to shoot me a note and to follow us on Twitter at NIGMS Training. Take care. Bye.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Gibbs, for this amazing talk. It's impressive to connect, not only the different pieces, the different parts of the training with their lived experiences, which is something that was missing in many of those approaches, but also making sure that students and trainees are being supported throughout the entire process, from undergrad all the way to faculty, and seeing the mosaic as in the first cohort as well, to be part of that bridge that was missing. This is incredible, especially, and also something that you mentioned in terms of opportunity, resources, and respect. I think that's all we wanted, to make this a diverse space and something that people can be very successful at. So thank you for the work that you do. Appreciate it.
And thank you for the work you do, because it takes a village, right? I'm fortunate to be able to have the opportunity, and we have great partners on the outside, and we'll all work together to advance the goals that we have of better science for all of us.
Absolutely. So we're going to kick off with a question from Professor Flores that she wants to ask you.
Thank you, Gustavo. You did a great job. Dr. Gibbs, that was a fantastic talk. Again, very informational. So my first question is, well, first of all, I wanted to give a shout out to Doctors Kristen Block and Ruma Banerjee, who actually are the PIs of the Mosaic. Again, they work very, very hard on this grant. So again, kudos to both of them. But my question is, I am a member of the T32 review panel for LBI. I believe that Dr. Antalis, our president for ASBMB, is also a member of that panel. And one of the things that we see, and very frequently, as a matter of fact, is in the recruitment plan to enhance diversity. We see a lot of investigators, a lot of PIs who actually just tag on. I mean, an incredibly detailed plan, but when you read the actual narrative of the grant, as well as the track record, it's very clear that they didn't even implement their own words that they submitted as part of the T32. And I think part of the problem is that, investigators know that this is not part of the final score, even though in our panel, we actually do pay attention to that. Are there any plans to actually move this from just something that is tagged on to something that really will have teeth and will factor into the score?
What we're doing at NIGMS is, as we're rolling through and reissuing our training FOAs, it actually is moved to the scored review criteria. And as it relates to, this gets very wonky. There are, by regulation, certain criteria you have to have for each type of mechanism, but then you can have additional review criteria which count toward the final score. And so you can see, if you look at, for example, the most recently published funding analysis we have are URISE and MARC. And so if you look at the additional review criteria, recruitment plan to enhance diversity is there. We intend to roll that through all of our FOAs. And then what happened with the parent T32 is what we piloted through our FOAs became taken up by NIH writ large. And so I can't speak for all of NIH, right? You need to refer to the Office of Extramural Research, Drs. Mike Lauer and Dr. Erica Boone, who's the acting director for Biomedical Research Workforce. But I know it's on the minds of many. We are taking the steps that we can take, and I encourage colleagues to continue to push for that. And I know that it's on the minds of many, and so I hear you. But again, even in the parent T32, diversity is part of the review criteria as it relates, So you just think, reviewers, we ask you to use your judgment. And people put their emphasis in different places as it relates to their judgment. So I encourage folks to look at the criteria and go for it, to help folks understand that, as we said, an excellent research training environment is one that can support diversity. If you cannot support diversity in many dimensions, you are not an excellent research training environment. And so that's how we are conceptualizing it at NIGMS.
Thank you. And Gustavo, I think there are several questions.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to some of the audience here. So Emery Halley asked, does NIH and NIGMS have plans to address underrepresentation of LGBTQ plus trainees as part of their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives?
Yeah, and so if you look at the Notice of Interest in Diversity from NIH, we say those are examples, right? So it's not meant to be exhaustive. Most of those are based on existing data where you have a benchmark of population representation, and then you can look to at representation in the biomedical research workforce. As it relates to those from LGBTQ communities, I know the NSF is currently, I believe the NSF is piloting data to actually get a better sense of what the populations are, right? Because most of the examples in the diversity statement are about underrepresentation. But whether or not there's underrepresentation, there's still issues of inclusion and equity. And we expect there to be inclusive and equitable environments for everybody. So everybody means everybody. And so that is the response I have now. But I encourage people, Mosaic is not limited by demography. It is other than citizens and permanent residents, but the focus is on people who have demonstrated commitments and contributions to enhancing diversity. So put your hat in the ring, right? If you think that counts for you, that describes you rather.
Great, thank you. We have another question here, and I'm just gonna make a quick point that Dr. Gibbs is not allowed to talk about specific grants, but the question is about if people missed the funding mark for just a few points, what's the best way to reach out to NIGMS to discuss that?
Yeah, so NIGMS has 5 different extramural facing divisions. I talked about the Division of Training, Workforce Development, Diversity. We have 3 research project grant divisions, and then we have the Division for Research Capacity Building. And so they administer what's called the IDEA program, which is a program that targets funding to the bottom half of states as it relates to those that get NIH funding, as well as focusing on building institutional capacity building at a number of different institution types. And so what I do is encourage you to go to NIGMS, put in your favorite search engine, put in NIGMS DRCB, and then you can reach out to Dr. Ming Lei, who is a division director, and he will respond and put you in contact with the right person. I will note that at NIGMS, we do not have a strict pay line, right? We are aware that there are biases in the peer review system, so we don't rely squarely on a bias system to give us an unbiased result. We look holistically and aim to have a wide and diverse portfolio, which includes different types of regions, backgrounds, areas of science addressed. And so I just want to give that as information as well, but I would encourage you to reach out to Dr. Ming Lei, who is the division director for research capacity building.
All right, thank you. So we have another question here that's asking, since most ICs are participating in the Mosaic program now, do you think the other ICs will support as many Mosaic scholars as NIGMS?
I refer that to my IC colleagues, and if you go to the Mosaic FAQs, we have a brand new table of IC specific contacts that you can reach out to. I will say that the number of scholars supported depends on the number of meritorious applications received. So apply and have your colleagues apply, because as there's an increasing need, I think it's reasonable to see that there could be additional resources allocated, right? I don't think we've yet hit a ceiling as it relates to the number of people that we could support. And so it just depends on each IC, really. At NIGMS, our leadership committed additional funds for the program. And so we're going to hit that. We're on target to hit the mark of the number of people we believe we could support. And if it keeps growing, I could imagine there'd be more resources brought to bear, because it is really hitting a niche that is critical within the enterprise.
So the advice here is keep applying.
Apply
to apply.
And again, I'm not. Yeah, I don't say it. I don't say that cavalierly, right? It's really, you got to apply, right? We can only recommendations to fund applications that are before us. So if you don't apply, we can't recommend you for funding. Additionally, again, we are aware there are issues in peer review. So if you apply and you think there might be an issue, reach out to your program officer afterward and say, hey, or if there's an update, because it takes a while, and say, here's an update that might actually be responsive to these comments. Please take that into consideration. Again, in IGMS, we are holistic in how we make our funding decisions. We know that meritorious science doesn't happen at a priority score of 20 and stops happening at a priority score of 21, for example, right? And so, yes, we're thoughtful in how we make these decisions.
Great. We have one for one of our graduate awardees, and I'm pretty sure you're going to have a lot of thoughts on this, but Tanya is asking about, do you have any idea about why the number of underrepresented scientists getting faculty positions is so lower compared to the number of PhD candidates that are graduating?
Yeah. There's a lot of reasons, right? So I think a couple things happen. What I didn't share, so as I mentioned, after I finished in the lab, I started doing research on the enterprise. So I published a paper with my colleague, Dr. Kimberly Griffin, and others in PLOS One in 2014, which really, or 2013, but it really showed that when you finish a PhD, the level of interest in a faculty career is significantly lower for whiter Asian women, underrepresented men, and especially underrepresented minority women relative to white or Asian men. And that's when you control for what their interests were when they started, their level of confidence, their perceptions of mentoring, and importantly, how much they published. And so, again, we talk about structural racism. Structural racism is made into structures that are mediated on people. So a lot of times people feel like this is not an environment for me. I think about my 3 friends, for example, that I mentioned earlier. Additionally, there are just a number, they haven't really been mechanisms focused on transitioning the people who want to do it, right? So Mosaic is really aiming at that opportunity. And again, there are biases in the system, and we tend to recreate the systems and get people who are just like us. And so our hope is that as we are all paying more attention to this, that we can begin to move forward together and make more pathways that allow folks to move forward and support their careers. The only last point I'll make is that Mosaic's focus on academic research careers, but there are a lot of careers where you contribute to the biomedical research workforce. I have one, for example, right? And so sometimes you get this idea that unless you're a tenure track prof, you're a failure. That's not the case. I don't think of myself as one. But I think there are multiple great options. Academia can be a great option, and other things can be a great option too. So I just want to put that out there, because sometimes it's the idea that we only want professors, and that's the goal of Mosaic, but our other training programs really focus on career development broadly within the biomedical research enterprise.
Yeah, it's even hard to imagine the effect or the impact that you have in biomedical research and training. So we all appreciate your position and your dedication to this enterprise. Kenny, I have another one for you here. Can you briefly describe the co-funding initiative of NIGMS and how to be considered for that opportunity?
Again, the co-funding, there are many different types of co-funding opportunities that happen, some from the Office of the Director, like the Office of Research on Women's Health. I think they're probably talking about idea state co-funding. And again, I would refer you to Dr. Ming Lei from the Division of Research Capacity Building. But at a high level, we look at applications that are meritorious and say which ones are from idea states, and think about which ones we might be able to support through that mechanism. And there's a lot of complexity to it that I won't get into here, but email Dr. Ming Lei. And if you are from, as well as, the division directors for the research project grant divisions, if you think that you're from an idea state and your application deserves consideration, they'll refer you to the right person, the right colleague, and we'll go from there.
All right, perfect. We have one more from our own Professor Ruma Banerjee, who is one of the PIs and Mosaic Scholar, and she's asking about how many new UE5s are expected to be awarded in the second round.
That's a question that I cannot discuss right now because nothing has gone through advisory council review. The goal is to ensure that any UE5s funded by NIH, so NIGMS or partner institutes, are aligned with program need, and that we can both support the UE5s we have currently and support scholars in areas that are coming in through the K99 program. So it's a sort of multi-phase approach where we're kind of building as we fly and are looking back to see, okay, what are areas that might not be as well represented now, but that's not something that I can discuss at this moment because peer review has not been completed. So to be determined.
All right. I think Professor Flores has one last question for you.
Go for it.
Again, this was fantastic. Thank you so much. So if you were now to come up with a few pearls of wisdom or words of wisdom for our rising scholars who clearly are so passionate about their research, what would those words be?
Yeah, go for it. So my mother, people know that, she always say, never self-eliminate. That's my main one. Never self-eliminate. Make them tell you no. Don't tell yourself no. Because I mean, basically every job I have, I've got out of grad school because I was like, well, let me just try and see, right? And I would say perseverance is important because you will have setbacks. Everybody has setbacks, right? I think about Carol Greider, Dr. Carol Greider, who won the Nobel Prize, and I heard her do a talk where she's like, you know, on the day she got the call for the Nobel Prize, her grant was not discussed at study section. And she's like, and I will read from the summary statement, right? So you can even win a Nobel Prize. And I think she said she was like folding laundry, and like, so it's like all the confluences of how sociology and science work. But do not self-eliminate, keep going for it. And importantly, reach out to program officers. We are there because we aim to be a resource. And so many times you apply without ever having even written to me to say, or my colleagues to say, hey, is this responsive? Are there points that mistakes applicants often make? Like if you email me, I have 6 bullet points that I send to everybody about Mosaic, for example, because these are the same mistakes people make. So I'm like, and we put it on the website, but reach out. After your summary statement comes out, reach out to have a conversation about what the next steps are, but really utilize us as part of the system, right? Because many of us are there because we're passionate about science and helping our colleagues that are on the ground to move it forward. So reach out to us, keep going, and do not self-eliminate. Do not self-eliminate. So if we were all in a room, I'd have us all say it together. But since I only see you, Gustavo, and Sonia, can you say it with me? Say, do not self-eliminate.
Do not self-eliminate.
Gustavo?
Do not self-eliminate.
There we go. All righty. So this has been a blast. I'm very appreciative for being able to speak and really being able to hear the scholars, Mosaic scholars, the grad students. Y'all were phenomenal. Keep doing the great work you're doing. And I'll sign off now. So take care.
Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kenny. That was amazing. Very enlightening and make us very hopeful for the future to know that GMS and the NIH is actually putting money, resources, and thought where it needs to be. So we appreciate you. We appreciate the work you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, all the scholars. Thank you, all the Mosaic scholars, all the awardees for this amazing session. And I'll let Professor Flores finish and close this session for us.
Yeah, and Gustavo, you did a phenomenal job. And I want to thank all of the participants, all of the members of the Minority Affairs Committee who, again, I mean, they take it upon themselves to really come up with projects that will enhance equity, justice, and inclusion in the society. I also want to thank all of the society leadership for all the support, and not just the technical support and financial support, but also, the support where they go, yes, go ahead, we will support you in any way that we can. So thank you so much, and thank you for participating here, and the meeting continues tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gustavo, and hopefully we'll meet again soon. Bye.